All right, we are live, and we are back. It is such a pleasure to be talking to you once again, Melanie.
Always a pleasure, Abby. It's been a while, but here we are again.
Yes, you've been very busy with traveling and good stuff, good news. But let's deal with it. Since the last time we spoke, we got an earthquake of an announcement from President Donald Trump. At least everyone is dealing with it as an earthquake. It was totally out of left field, as President Trump likes to do. His announcement to remove the remaining 2,000 U.S. troops in Syria. Mm-hmm. Now, people in America were saying, oh my God, this is horrible, and it's supportive of Iran, because it's going to let them take over Syria. People who are supportive of Israel are saying, oh, he's throwing Israel under the bus. Which, on the other hand, there are some people in Israel saying it might not be so good for us, but it's not so bad either. And then there is also the cozy attitude we're seeing in terms of him and Erdogan of Turkey. Where, at the one hand, I think to myself, oh my God, that's horrible. On the other hand, wait a second, maybe this is President Donald Trump once again using the tried and true strategy of keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Don't know, putting it out there. But what is your take on this move, again, vis-a-vis the whole Middle East and Israel?
Well, I think you've very aptly encapsulated the complexity of this. By and large, the reaction has been fairly one-sidedly critical on the basis that, pulling out the troops from pulling out the troops from Syria is being likened to President Obama pulling out the remaining troops from Iraq, which had a profoundly destabilizing effect. And we know that these American troops have acted as a kind of buffer to prevent the feared land bridge being established by Iran, in which they can have an uninterrupted progress across several countries. And that's true. And I also think that the cozying up to Erdogan is extremely troubling. But then I think Erdogan is extremely troubling. I mean, Erdogan, is an Islamist, an out-and-out Islamist, and an out-and-out anti-Semite. And yet he is part of NATO. Turkey is part of NATO because Turkey has, by virtue of where it is in the world, it has a strategic importance for the West, which the West cannot deny. So I think the West hasn't sort of got to grips with the Erdogan problem, that they have a kind of snake in the middle of their alliance. Now, for President Trump to basically, to say to Erdogan, it's yours, take it, for goodness sake, I don't want it anymore, as far as Syria is concerned, is on the one hand very troubling, because it strengthens Erdogan, it strengthens Iran because it removes the buffer. And that's largely the reaction that we've been getting from critics in the West. Right. And a number of people in Israel have also, quite obviously and understandably, said virtually the same thing. But also within Israel, there are others, which you alluded to, which present a more nuanced take on this. First of all, they say 2,000 troops is neither here nor there. I mean, it's like a derisory number. Does anybody really think those 2,000 troops are preventing anything seriously from happening? Those troops have had very limited engagement while they've been in Syria. The second thing is, and this is coming obviously from the Israelis, is that Israel alone has taken care of its urgent security needs in Syria and will continue to do so. It's Israeli warplanes that are bombing the transports of critical military infrastructure into Syria to prevent Iran from establishing a military base in Syria. America has not been involved in that. It's Israel been doing that.
Right. I think it's important to note the mandate of those troops is actually not to do anything against Iran. Exactly. Because it's the Obama mandate, which was cozy with Iran.
Exactly. So in a way, it's more kind of optics. It's more the optics. And from President Trump's point of view, you can kind of see how he's thinking. I mean, he's a realist, a very brutal realist. And the brutal realism is that the Syria war is virtually over and that President Assad has won, or he is winning, but he's either won or he's winning. So why would America want to continue to keep its troops there, especially since it's quite likely or possible that there will be trouble flaring up in Syria around those American troops, and then America gets sucked in to the Syrian morass. Why would it get sucked in at this stage? It's over.
Right.
Assad has won. It's throwing good people after bad. So you can see the way he has thought. Now, what I said in the piece I wrote for my website, melaniephillips.com, on this decision was also to say this, that putting out the 2,000 troops may be a mistake. It's a finely balanced thing because there are analysts on both sides of this, whether it's a really bad mistake, a little bit of a mistake, or whatever. But the really important thing is that President Trump has set himself to destroy the Iranian regime, to bring the regime to heel. So he has instituted sanctions. That's terribly important because if President Trump's strategy towards Iran actually somehow destroys the regime's power, then what's 2,000 American troops got to do with it? The most important thing is that he has this idea, this view, that the Iran deal is a total disaster, and that Iran has to be the Iranian regime has to be brought to heel by condign sanctions, a policy which is being opposed by a lot of people in Europe who have said how terrible it is that he's an isolationist and he's pulled troops out of out of Syria. Now, and then the final point that I made in my blog post is this: Trump is said to be an isolationist. In fact, if you look at what he says, it's not so much isolationism, it's more the idea that the rest of the world should pay its way.
Right.
That the idea that America is the kind of security blanket, comfort blanket for a largely hostile Europe and the rest of the West, which, dumps on America while it's using the security shield that America provides. Trump says, why are we doing this? It's time for everyone else to step up to the plate. That's why he has gone to war, as it were, inside NATO to get other NATO countries to increase their contributions. And you can see this happening also in this Syria policy. For example, one of his tweets after he announced this policy was to say, and I've not read this anywhere else, but he said it, that Saudi Arabia, in the wake of that policy decision, has now said that it will underwrite or fund or make a major contribution to the funding of the reconstruction of Syria. And Trump said, you see what happens? Those are the people who should be, helping in Syria. They're, on the border, rather than us who are, 5,000 miles away. So he wants basically the world to grow up. He wants it to stop its infantilism, its dependency culture on America. Now, I have to say, that's, on the one hand, that's good.
Right.
Because there is far too much grandstanding by Europe in particular, which doesn't want to defend itself ever, but relies on America. And that's bad. On the other hand, if America were to withdraw itself from the conflict areas of the world, the bad guys win. And it's this balance. It's a fine line. It's a fine line. Now, President Trump's declared strategy towards Iran suggests to me he does not want the bad guys to win. He understands that geopolitical, strategic, global view. And the final thing to say is this, that if you're talking about his isolationism, at around the same time that he was deciding to pull out the troops from Syria, the Senate passed a resolution saying that America should no longer fund or be in alliance with Saudi Arabia in Yemen. It should defund it. Why? Because the Senate, the Senate is extremely upset about the murder of the Saudi dissident Jamal Khashoggi, which, rightly or wrongly, they blame on the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Salman bin Mohammed. Wrong way around.
MBS.
Mohammed bin Salman.
There you go.
And consequently, they want to defund the war in Yemen. But this is completely crazy. This is isolationism.
Right.
Because if Saudi Arabia loses to Iran in Yemen, I mean, my goodness.
Because that's what it's about. It's an Iranian-funded proxy war against Saudi Arabia in Yemen.
Exactly. If Iran controls Yemen, then Saudi Arabia will be surrounded on all sides by water by Iran.
Right.
Iran will have the mother and father of all land bridges, which you will have access to a land bridge, as it were, inside Africa. It would be unthinkable, actually, in the interests of the West, let alone Saudi Arabia, for that to happen. That's why America is helping Saudi Arabia. It's not helping Saudi Arabia out of the goodness of its heart. It is strategically crucial that Yemen does not fall to Iran. And, you have some Republican senator in America saying, why should we be helping Saudi Arabia in a country thousands of miles away about which virtually nothing is known by anyone here? I mean, how incredibly ignorant is this? That is isolationism. That really is isolationism. And the Trump administration has gone to some lengths to try and prevent the Senate resolution from happening, and it failed. So now it's going to have to fight it in some way. But that, to me, is the most crucial thing. Trump wants Iran's regime out. He is imposing draconian sanctions on it. He is fighting it by proxy, by helping Saudi Arabia in Yemen. This man is not an isolationist. He just has a particular view of the world which doesn't square with everyone else's.
So, final question on this, and I have to keep it short because there's one more issue we want to talk about. I'm going to posit the following theory, which I know it's been talked about. All these attacks against Trump's policy is not about Trump's policy, but it's about being against Trump. For instance, on the one hand, it's the Democrats and the social justice warriors who are pushing for America to pull out of Saudi Arabia. They're the ones who are always against America being involved in war. Why all of a sudden should they be against Trump pulling out 2,000 troops from Syria? If anything, that should be a Democratic program. Let's get our troops out of there. Okay, that's one. And two, you brought up Khashoggi, right? Let's say, for true or not true, doesn't make a difference. The saying is that Saudi Arabia is responsible for killing him. Turkey has killed numerous journalists, jailed numerous journalists, and then again you see the American establishment silent about all of that, and all of a sudden going up in arms about this one journalist because it allows them to go after Trump and his relationship with Saudi Arabia. So that's what I'm positing here. Is it more about policies, or is it really more just going after each and everything that has to do with trying to bring Trump down?
For the left's point of view, it's so much of it is about Trump himself. Plus, they have a notorious record in not supporting anything that might help the West, and only wanting to support people who are against the West. But it's not just the left, and I just referred to a Republican senator.
Correct.
I mean, the level of ignorance in America, I'm afraid, American political circles, about the complexities of the world, I'm afraid is very frightening, and that's a cross-party ignorance.
Correct. All right, wonderful. Great answer. All right, next. Just recently, a week or two ago, the EU comes out with a new survey of anti-Semitism. Very, very troubling. You've written about it already? I did not see the article yet.
You should be reading my blog.
I do. I'm not on top of the latest. But yes, so please share with us. What did you?
It's a survey that was last done 6 years ago, and by an EU committee. It finds an alarming increase in anti-Semitism, except that, health warning, it's been reported as an alarming increase in anti-Semitism.
Okay.
What it actually is an alarming increase in the perception by European Jews of anti-Semitism.
Okay.
The European Jews in the Jewish communities in Britain and mainland Europe, are exceptionally worried about anti-Semitism, much more than they were 6 years ago.
Right.
Now, health warning, because that doesn't mean there is more anti-Semitism. It means they're more aware of it.
Right.
Now, to a certain extent, it has increased. But you can't sort of say, because, so many of them are so much more concerned, it has increased by that amount. You have to be careful, because it's a very subjective view. And what's interesting is that, particularly in Great Britain, Britain has had the most dramatic rise in this concern over the last 6 years. I've forgotten the precise figure, but it's a significant amount more than the rest of Europe. And yet, when you look at the actual incidents reported by the Jewish community of anti-Semitic incidents that they have experienced or that they know people have experienced, it's relatively low.
In Britain, really?
In Britain. Whereas in, say, France, the actual incidence is relatively high. And they have every reason to be, that's something like 95% of French Jews perceive it to be a really big problem. A big problem or a really big problem is not surprising, given what's been happening there. So the actual violence, the murders and harassment and so on. That's not going on in Britain. So why is that this enormous jump in perception? And the answer is in 2 words: Jeremy Corbyn. People are very, very concerned, quite rightly so, that Jeremy Corbyn, the ultra-far left leader of the Labour Party, a man who has presided over anti-Semitic utterances by members of his party without doing anything really about them, a man who does not accept that he himself has come out with a support for people who are profoundly anti-Jew. And consequently, people are very frightened about the possibility that Jeremy Corbyn could become Britain's Prime Minister. And that is a very real concern. But that is... So what we've been living through in Britain for the last several years, since Jeremy Corbyn came to power, is a hugely heightened perception of anti-Semitism in Britain. But from where I'm coming from, the anti-Semitism epidemic in Britain did not start with Jeremy Corbyn. It's been a characteristic of progressive circles for much longer than that. So I think, again, one has to be a little careful about these kind of statistical surveys. But the interesting thing that comes out of this survey is that, given that it's perceptions of anti-Semitism, the perceptions are that the main group, the group which is mainly responsible for anti-Semitism across Europe, is the Muslim community, closely followed by the left, with the far right way down. And of course, if you listen to the Jewish community in Britain and Europe, generally, they always focus upon the far right.
That's it.
As being the main nightmare. And furthermore, they look with horror on countries such as Hungary, which is led by Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban is said to be an anti-Semite. Why? Because Viktor Orban has a personal war against George Soros, the Jewish financier, who is opposed to national borders and the Western nation state.
And who brings down countries' currencies.
That's also true. But Orban, wants to preserve Hungary for Hungarians, and he particularly wants to keep out Muslims. So for that reason, Orban is deemed to be Islamophobic and anti-Semitic. And yet, Hungary turns out in this survey to be, in the perception of European Jews, one of the safest places for Jews.
Just putting it right out there, I know recently it's come out, I don't know whether a survey or whether people have said, as a religious Jew, I have no problem walking down the streets of Hungary with my head covering, showing that I'm Jew, but in Paris, no way. It's too dangerous to...
It's said. One has to say, Hungary has a terrible past in terms of anti-Jewish behaviour, and it still has a very significant anti-Jewish problem, no question about that. But Orban himself is actually keeping that down, and is incredibly supportive of Israel and so on and so forth.
And I guess just as a final point, and just to get your feedback on it, because this is directly connected, recently now in France it started and then it took off around the world, the Yellow Vest movement, and we just recently published a video and wrote about this, that unfortunately there has been anti-Semitism that's crept into it.
That's right.
From what I understand, it was initially an economic protest movement, And now all of a sudden you're hearing people coming out against Macron saying that he worked for the Rothschild Bank and therefore there's anti-Semitism because of the capitalistic Jews.
Yeah.
And then you also have the Muslims getting involved with their anti-Semitism against Jews. And then you have the leftists involved, and it's all coming together, and it's so dangerous.
No, it's true. And that is a very striking characteristic of the Yellow Vest movement, because it kind of came from left field. I mean, what's that got to do with anything?
Right.
In a rational world. But, what the survey shows is that among European Jews, the perception of anti-Semitism, the concern about anti-Semitism is greatest in left liberal countries. Not greatest in places like Hungary or Poland.
Right.
I mean, there is a significant problem in these countries, no question. But in terms of how safe Jews feel, which really is all about, I think it's all about the policies of the government and the people who run the country. Those countries are, way down. Mm. So that is a very interesting finding by this survey, and one that I think will not be given the attention it deserves by the Jewish communities in Britain and Europe, because they are so obsessed with never criticising the Muslim community because that's Islamophobic, and this idea that anti-Semitism is a factor of the far right. Even while they're talking about their fears about Jeremy Corbyn. Right. But then you see it's Jeremy Corbyn.
Right. It's not the left. It's just a person.
It's him.
That's how they explain it in their heads. Oh my God,
so it's only the ultra far left.
Right,
But they are a particularly obnoxious and dangerous part of this problem, no question. But it goes far, far beyond them. Beyond them. So this is the perverse way in which I think the Jewish communities themselves are, while being the victims of this, don't actually acknowledge properly what it is, where the threat against them is actually coming from.
Right. Wow. Melanie, it is always a pleasure to hear your insight. Thank you so much. Everyone, if you are not yet following Melanie, go to melaniephillips.com, go to her website, sign up for her newsletter. You'll be able to hear it right as soon as she writes things. I'm a little behind, as you heard, but I'm catching up little by little. But you're writing more now. Thank God. They're a little. She's back into the busy season. But continue writing everything that needs to be written for people to read, and it should be a good, safe, and happy week.
Likewise, and thank you so much to everybody for watching and listening, and have a good 2019.
That's right. Here we go. 2019. All right. It should be a good, safe year, everyone. Take care.